A down-on-her-luck mechanic aided a little girl who was struggling, enabling her to take her first pain-free steps in a rain-swept parking lot. Clara thought it was just another dead-end repair job. Little did she know that the child's father was the most feared mafia boss in the city. And she definitely didn't foresee the lengths he'd go to keep her a fixture in their lives. The rain beat against the windshield like a barrage of bullets. Clara Martinez wiped her grease-covered hands on her stained coveralls and glanced at the stack of past-due bills looming on her desk. The fluorescent lights in her small, cramped garage flickered intermittently, threatening to plunge her into darkness. Another repair she simply couldn't afford. At 28, she was already 3 months behind on the rent for a business that barely brought in enough to keep her fed. Should have stayed in school, she muttered under her breath, reaching for the light switch when she heard it. The unmistakable, expensive purr of an engine sputtering and dying right outside her garage door. Peering through the rain-streaked window, Clara saw something that was completely out of place in this neighborhood. A black Mercedes S-Class, the kind of car that cost more than she'd make in 5 years, slowly rolled to a stop beneath the broken street light. Steam hissed from under the hood like an angry snake. Clara's first thought was to ignore it completely. Rich folks had roadside assistance. They didn't need a struggling mechanic in the roughest part of Brooklyn. But then the back door creaked open, and she saw the girl. She couldn't have been more than 10, struggling to get out of the car, her small face contorted in a mask of frustration. A man emerged from the driver's side, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in a suit that probably cost more than Clara's rent for 6 months. He moved to help the girl, but she fiercely brushed his hands away with the raw independence of someone who was tired of being treated like they might break at any moment. Clara was already moving toward the door. "Need help?" she called out, stepping out into the pouring rain. The man turned, and Clara felt an inexplicable chill slide down her spine. He had the kind of face that made you instantly forget what you were about to say. Not just because he was handsome, though he definitely was, but because of the way his dark eyes took her in, assessing, calculating, measuring threat levels in the blink of an eye. "The car died," he said simply. His voice carried the faint trace of a New York Italian accent, the kind that had mostly faded from the city but still lingered in certain families. "Can you fix it?" he asked, cutting to the chase. "I can take a look," Clara responded, approaching the car and deliberately keeping her movements casual. Something about this man set off every alarm bell in her head, but she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "Pop the hood." As he did, Clara glanced at the girl, who had finally managed to get out of the car and was now leaning heavily against the door, breathing hard. She wore leg braces, the expensive medical kind, but they were clearly not fitted properly. The metal dug into her skin above her shoes, and the joints looked stiff and unforgiving. "You okay?" Clara asked her. The girl looked up, visibly surprised that someone was talking to her instead of about her. She had the same dark eyes as the man, but hers held something softer. Hope, maybe, or just the desperate wish that someone would see her as more than her disability. "I'm fine," she said, but Clara could clearly see that she wasn't. Clara dove into the engine, her hands finding problems with an almost supernatural ease, like a pianist finding keys on a familiar instrument. The rain soaked through her shirt, but she barely noticed. This was what she excelled at: seeing how things worked, understanding why they didn't, and figuring out how to make them work again. "Alternator's shot," she announced 5 minutes later. "I can replace it, but not tonight. I'll need to order the part." "How long?" the man asked, his voice brooking no argument. 2 days, maybe 3. "We need the car now." Clara wiped rain from her face, her mind already racing to find a workaround. "Then I can rig something temporary. Get you maybe 20 miles, enough to get wherever you're going, but it'll die again, and next time it might not be fixable." The man considered this for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Do it." Clara worked swiftly, bypassing the damaged alternator and connecting the battery directly to the ignition system. It was a total hack job, the kind of thing that made her cringe professionally, but it would get them where they needed to go, at least for a little while. Behind her, she could hear the girl struggling, trying to walk toward the garage entrance and out of the rain. Each step sounded painful, the metal scraping against metal, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Clara glanced back and immediately saw the problem. The braces were locked at the wrong angle, forcing the girl's legs into an unnatural, contorted position. Whoever had fitted them had focused solely on support, completely disregarding the need for natural movement. "Hey," Clara said, straightening up, "your braces are adjusted wrong." The man's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing like a predator's. "What? Her braces? They're fighting against her instead of helping her. Mind if I take a look?" The girl, Lucia, Clara would later learn, looked at her father with such desperate hope that Clara felt something crack in her chest. The man hesitated, visibly warring with himself, then gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Clara knelt in the rain beside Lucia, ignoring the cold water soaking into her jeans. Up close, the problem was even more glaringly obvious. The joint locks were set for standing, not walking, and the support bar was pressed directly against bone instead of muscle. "This is going to sound weird," Clara said, trying to choose her words carefully, "but I think I can help." She caught herself, mind already racing through mechanics. "The car door has an adjustable support bar. If I—" She trailed off, mind already working through the mechanics. She ran back to her garage, grabbed her toolkit, and returned to Lucia's side. For the next 10 minutes, Clara worked in focused silence, detaching the car door's internal support mechanism, adjusting its tension, and jury-rigging it onto Lucia's braces with medical tape and wire. She modified the angle, redistributed the pressure points, and adjusted the knee joint to allow for natural movement instead of forcing rigid immobility. "Okay," Clara said finally, rocking back on her heels, a sense of anticipation building within her. "Try putting weight on it now." Lucia looked at her father, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of hope and trepidation. He nodded slowly, silently urging her on. The girl pushed off from the car, and for the first time in who knew how long, she took a step without grimacing, then another. The motion was still assisted, still cautious, but the agonizing pain had vanished from her face, replaced by something Clara hadn't seen before. Pure, unadulterated joy. "Papa," Lucia whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "It doesn't hurt." The man, Matteo, though Clara didn't yet know his name, stared at his daughter walking, really walking for the first time in months. When he looked back at Clara, something had shifted in his eyes. The calculation was still there, the constant assessment of risk, but now there was something else. Something dangerous. Respect. "How much do I owe you?" he asked quietly, his voice devoid of its earlier edge. "For the car? $80. For the braces? Nothing." That was just. Clara shrugged, trying to downplay the significance of what she'd done. Basic mechanics. Matteo pulled out a wallet that looked thick enough to choke a horse, overflowing with crisp $100 bills. He peeled off 5 of them and handed them to her. "The car service was $80, Clara protested, the words barely out of her mouth. "The rest is for your discretion," Matteo said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument. "It wasn't a request. You didn't see us. This conversation didn't happen." Every instinct screamed at Clara to ask questions, to demand to know what she'd just unwittingly gotten herself involved in. But then she looked at Lucia, still taking tentative steps, still smiling like someone had just handed her the entire world, and she found herself nodding. "Never saw you," she agreed. They drove away into the rain, the Mercedes coughing and sputtering but ultimately running. Clara stood in the downpour, $500 clutched tightly in her hand, and wondered what kind of mistake she'd just made. She wouldn't have to wonder for long. Matteo Ricci hadn't become one of New York's most feared men by trusting strangers, let alone a stranger in a beat-up garage, no matter how skilled with a wrench. Yet here he was, driving through the rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn, his daughter chattering excitedly in the back seat, and all he could think about was the mechanic with the grease-stained fingernails who had just accomplished what a whole team of orthopedic specialists at Mount Sinai couldn't. "Papa, did you see? I walked without it hurting." Lucia's voice bubbled with uncontainable joy. She just looked at it for a minute and knew exactly what was wrong. Dr. Morrison said the braces were fitted perfectly, but they hurt every single day, and she fixed it in the rain with stuff from a car door. Mateo glanced in the rearview mirror. Lucia was touching her braces as if they were crafted from solid gold, her fingers gently tracing the modifications Clara had made. The pain lines that had become permanent fixtures around his daughter's eyes for the past 6 months were finally gone. 6 months, $50,000 in consultations, the best pediatric orthopedic surgeon in the state, and none of them had been able to figure out what a broke mechanic in a failing garage had spotted in 30 seconds flat. She was nice too, Lucia continued, her voice full of wonder. Not nice like the doctors who used their baby voices. Actually, nice. She talked to me like I was normal. Normal. The word hit Mateo's chest like a physical blow. Lucia had been in a car accident 2 years ago, a hit and run that had shattered her left leg and severely damaged nerves in her right. The driver was never caught, but Mateo had found him anyway. That was a closed chapter. What wasn't closed was the agonizing process of watching his bright, fearless daughter slowly withdraw into herself as surgeries failed and doctors offered hollow sympathy instead of real solutions. "We'll send her a proper thank you," Mateo said carefully, choosing his words with precision. "But Lucia, you can't go back there." "Why not?" Lucia asked, her voice laced with disappointment. "Because that neighborhood is controlled by the Castellano family. Because I have enemies who would love to know my daughter has a regular schedule anywhere outside our protected territory. Because that mechanic, however skilled, is a civilian who doesn't understand the world we live in. It's not safe," he said instead, opting for a simpler, more palatable explanation. Lucia went quiet, and Mateo recognized the stubborn set of her jaw in the mirror. She had inherited that from him, along with the dark eyes and the utter inability to accept defeat. His phone buzzed. It was Vincent, his second in command. "We need to talk about the Castellano situation," Vincent said without preamble, his voice grim. "Tomorrow, boss. They hit another one of our—" Mateo hung up abruptly, cutting him off mid-sentence. The car sputtered violently, and Mateo swore under his breath. The mechanic had warned him. 20 miles. They were barely at 15, and home was still a good 10 minutes away. He coaxed the Mercedes through 3 more blocks before it finally died completely outside a 24-hour diner on 5th Avenue. Mateo called for a pickup, then took Lucia inside to wait. She ordered hot chocolate and sat in the booth, still animatedly talking about the garage lady. "She had this look," Lucia said, her eyes shining with admiration. "Like she could see right through the metal to what was wrong underneath. That's a superpower, Papa. Like X-ray vision, but for machines." Mateo's coffee arrived, bitter and far too hot. He sipped it anyway, the warmth spreading slowly through his chest. The truth was, he'd noticed the same thing. When Clara Martinez had knelt in the rain beside his daughter, there had been no hesitation, no uncertainty. She'd seen the problem, understood it, and fixed it with an almost unnerving precision. No consultation fees, no 3-week waiting periods for appointments, no condescending explanations about how these things take time. She'd just done it. In Mateo's world, competence was currency. He surrounded himself with the best. The smartest lawyers, the most ruthless enforcers, the most connected politicians. He paid top dollar for excellence because excellence kept him alive and his family safe. But this mechanic hadn't wanted money. She had refused payment for helping Lucia. That bothered him more than it probably should have. People always wanted something. Always. You just had to figure out what it was. "Do you think she can make me walk without the braces one day?" Lucia asked suddenly, her voice small and laced with a vulnerability that tore at his heart. Mateo looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing her not as the child he needed to protect, but as the girl she was. She was 10 years old, and somewhere along the line, she'd stopped dreaming of running, of dancing, of simply being like the other kids at her private school. The accident had taken more than her mobility. It had taken her hope. Until tonight, until a stranger in a rundown garage had handed it back to her, piece by piece. "I don't know, baby," Mateo said honestly, unwilling to make a promise he couldn't guarantee. "Can we at least ask her?" Mateo's phone buzzed again. 3 texts from Vincent, 2 from his attorney, 1 from his sister Rosa, asking if Lucia had a good day. The world kept spinning, relentlessly demanding his attention, his decisions, his unwavering control. But in this moment, sitting in a cheap diner with weak coffee, all Mateo could see was Clara Martinez kneeling in the rain, her hands steady and sure as she rebuilt his daughter's braces with nothing but salvaged car parts and sheer intuition. A black SUV pulled up outside. Marco, one of his drivers, climbed out and held the door open. Mateo helped Lucia into the vehicle, carefully watching her test her braces with each step. No grimace, no sharp intake of breath, just walking. "Papa?" Lucia said as they drove toward their estate in Long Island, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and crimson. "I know you said I can't go back, but what if my braces break again? Dr. Morrison doesn't know how to fix what she did." It was a valid point, one that Mateo had already considered and didn't particularly like. The modifications Clara had made were temporary, improvised. They'd inevitably need maintenance, adjustments, and probably rebuilding, which meant either finding another specialist who could understand what she'd done, a highly unlikely prospect, or going back to the source. Neither option was ideal. Both carried significant risks. But as Mateo carried his sleeping daughter into their home 2 hours later, carefully cradling her in his arms so as not to wake her, he made a decision. He'd have Vincent run a complete background check on Clara Martinez, digging up every detail of her life, every debt, every connection. If she was clean, and that was a monumental if maybe, just maybe, she could be useful. Not for him, for Lucia. Everything Mateo did was for Lucia. He laid his daughter gently in her bed, pulled the covers up, and kissed her forehead. She stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. "Garage lady fixed it. Papa, she fixed it." Mateo turned off the light and quietly closed the door. Tomorrow he'd make calls. Tomorrow he'd investigate. Tomorrow he'd decide if the mechanic who'd done the impossible could be trusted with his daughter's well-being. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, his daughter had gone to sleep without crying from pain. That was worth investigating. That was worth almost anything. Clara was under a 2008 Honda Civic, fighting with a stubborn oil pan, when she heard the footsteps. Not the usual shuffle of her regular customers, like Mrs. Chun with her beat-up minivan or Tony from the pizzeria with his delivery truck. These were different. Deliberate, controlled, the kind of footsteps that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up and prickle with unease. She rolled out from under the car, wrench in hand, and froze. The girl from the rainy night, Lucia, stood hesitantly in the doorway of her garage, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun. Behind her loomed a man built like a refrigerator, wearing sunglasses indoors and a jacket that didn't quite conceal the unmistakable bulge under his left arm. Clara had grown up in this neighborhood. She knew what a gun looked like under a jacket, and her instincts screamed at her to run. Clara said, slowly getting to her feet, trying to project an air of calm she certainly didn't feel. "Can I help you?" Lucia stepped forward, and Clara immediately saw that something was terribly wrong. The girl was limping badly, even worse than before, and her face was tight with pain. She was visibly trying to hide it, but failing miserably. "It broke," Lucia said, her voice small and strained. She held up her right leg slightly, indicating the brace. "The part you fixed. I was walking down the stairs at school, and it just snapped." The bodyguard, because that's clearly what he was, shifted his weight, his movements telegraphing a readiness for violence. His hand moved fractionally closer to his jacket, his posture radiating barely suppressed menace. Clara's mind raced, frantically searching for a solution, a way out. This was bad. This was getting involved in something dangerously bad. The smart move would be to say she couldn't help, to send them to a real medical equipment specialist, to forget this ever happened. But then Lucia looked up at her with those desperate, imploring dark eyes, and Clara heard herself say, "Okay, let me see it." The bodyguard spoke for the first time, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Miss Raichi needs to be home in 90 minutes. Miss Raichi." So now Clara had a last name. She definitely wished she didn't. I'll be fast, Clara said, gesturing toward her workbench, trying to project an air of confidence. Lucia, you can sit here. The bodyguard, whose name tag identified him as Marco, positioned himself by the door, his gaze sweeping the street outside, then returning to fixate on Clara with unwavering intensity. His hand never strayed far from his jacket, a silent warning. Clara knelt beside Lucia and carefully examined the brace. The support bar she'd modified had indeed snapped, but not from poor workmanship. The metal had visible stress fractures, indicating that Lucia had been putting it through its paces. Really using it, walking more than she had in months, probably pushing herself to her physical limits. You've been walking a lot, Clara observed, stating the obvious. Lucia's face lit up despite the pain, her dark eyes sparkling with pride. Every day I walked to my classes instead of using the wheelchair. I walked around the whole garden at home. Papa couldn't believe it. He kept asking if it hurt, but it didn't. Not until this morning when it broke. Clara felt a surge of warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in far too long. This kid had been trapped in a prison of pain and immobility, and a simple fix, a little ingenuity, had given her her freedom back. That meant something. The problem is the metal I used, Clara explained, reaching for her tools. It was from a car door, meant for occasional use, not constant stress. I need to rebuild this with something stronger. She surveyed her garage, her mind rapidly cataloging available materials. Her eyes landed on a damaged titanium bike frame she'd been meaning to scrap. Titanium. Lightweight, flexible, incredibly strong. Give me 40 minutes, Clara said, her voice firm with newfound resolve. She worked with focused intensity, her movements precise and efficient as she cut and shaped the titanium, creating a new support structure that would flex naturally with Lucia's movement instead of fighting against it. As she worked, Lucia chattered away, filling the silence with her bright, infectious energy. Dr. Morrison was so confused when he saw what you did, Lucia said, giggling. He kept asking where we'd gotten the modifications done. Papa wouldn't tell him. He just said we'd handled it privately. Clara's hands paused for a fraction of a second, the movement almost imperceptible. Something about the way Lucia said Papa wouldn't tell him sent a subtle warning signal flashing through her brain. Your dad seems protective, Clara said carefully, testing the waters. He has to be, Lucia said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Because of his work. What does he do? Marco shifted imperceptibly by the door, his presence suddenly more imposing than ever. Clara felt his attention sharpen, like a predator sensing an opportunity. Imports and exports, Lucia said quickly, the words sounding rehearsed, like a line she'd been taught to say. He's very busy. Important meetings all the time. Right. Imports and exports with bodyguards and $500 tips and cars that cost more than Clara's entire business. Clara kept her mouth shut and kept working, focusing on the task at hand. She didn't just repair the brace. She improved it, exceeding even her own expectations. She added a micro-adjustment system using salvaged bike gear components, allowing Lucia to fine-tune the tension herself. She reinforced the joints with aircraft-grade bolts, ensuring maximum durability. She lightened the overall weight by 30%, making it even easier for Lucia to move. When she finally finished, Clara had created something that looked like it belonged in a medical journal, not a rundown Brooklyn garage. Try it, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Lucia stood slowly, cautiously testing her weight, her small body trembling with suppressed excitement. Then she took a step. Another. Her eyes went wide, her breath catching in her throat. It's better than before, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. It's so much better. I can barely feel it. She walked a circle around the garage, her movements growing more confident with each step. By the third lap, she was grinning so wide Clara thought her face might split in two. How much? Marco asked gruffly, stepping forward and pulling out a thick wallet. Nothing, Clara said firmly. Just be careful with it this time. That titanium is strong. but it's not indestructible. Marco frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of taking something for free. He pulled out 3 $100 bills and placed them on the workbench. "For your time," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a suggestion. Lucia hugged Clara suddenly, fiercely, her small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means." But Clara was starting to. She was starting to understand that she'd stumbled into something far bigger than a broken car on a rainy night. Something involving a little girl who desperately needed help and a family that operated by a different set of rules than normal people. As Marco led Lucia back to the black SUV parked down the street. How had Clara not noticed that before? Lucia turned back and waved, her smile radiant. "Can I come back?" she called, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. If something breaks again, Clara should have said no. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to cut ties now, before whatever this was got any deeper. "Sure," she heard herself say, the words escaping her lips almost involuntarily. "Yeah, you can come back." The SUV pulled away, disappearing into the afternoon traffic, and Clara stood alone in her garage, holding $300 she hadn't asked for and wondering what kind of trouble she just invited into her life. Her phone buzzed, displaying a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for helping my daughter." Clara stared at the message for a long moment, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach, before deleting it. She didn't need tangible proof of this connection, didn't need a digital trail that could be traced back to her. But something deep down told her it was already far too late for that. The first Tuesday, Lucia showed up with Marco and asked if Clara could teach her about engines. Clara, who was currently immersed in replacing a transmission on a Ford Explorer, looked up in surprise, her brow furrowed. "Engines?" she repeated, her voice questioning. "Papa says I should learn practical skills," Lucia explained, though her eyes kept drifting down to her braces, a clear indication of where her true interests lay. "And, I like it here. It smells like possibility." That was such an odd, yet perfectly fitting thing to say that Clara found herself nodding in agreement, her initial reservations momentarily forgotten. The second Tuesday, Lucia arrived with a sketchpad tucked under her arm. She'd drawn detailed modifications she thought might make the braces even better, most of them completely impossible given the constraints of physics and available materials, but some of them surprisingly brilliant, displaying an innate understanding of engineering principles. Clara showed her how to properly use a socket wrench while secretly implementing the one idea that might actually work, a subtle adjustment to the ankle support that promised to improve Lucia's balance. By the third Tuesday, it wasn't even a question. Lucia would arrive promptly at 4:30, diligently do her homework on Clara's cluttered desk, then watch with laser-like focus as Clara worked on whatever automotive project was currently occupying the bay. And always, without fail, Clara would dedicate the last 30 minutes of Lucia's visit to meticulously adjusting, modifying, and painstakingly improving Lucia's braces, constantly striving to enhance her mobility and comfort. "You're walking smoother," Clara observed one afternoon, watching Lucia move across the garage without holding onto anything, her movements fluid and increasingly natural. "Almost no compensating with your hip. It's amazing." "I walked up all the stairs at school yesterday," Lucia said proudly, her face beaming with unadulterated joy. "Didn't use the elevator once. My teacher cried." She was happy crying, but still. Clara smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression that reached all the way to her eyes, as she carefully adjusted a joint mechanism, replacing the standard, off-the-shelf hinge with a custom-designed ball bearing system she'd scavenged from a luxury car suspension. The movement was noticeably smoother now, more fluid and natural, allowing for a greater range of motion. "Tell me again why your dad pays for expensive doctors when you've got me fixing you up with junkyard parts?" Clara said half-jokingly, trying to keep the mood light. Lucia's face instantly went serious, her youthful features hardening with a gravity that belied her age. "Because doctors see what's broken," she said, her voice low and intense. "You see what's possible." The simple, yet profound words hit Clara harder than they should have, resonating deep within her soul, and forcing her to confront long-buried insecurities. She focused intently on the brace, threading a new tension cable through the intricate frame, trying to distract herself from the unsettling truth in Lucia's statement. Marco stood silently by the door as always, his presence a constant reminder of the dangerous world that surrounded Lucia, watchful and ever vigilant. Over the weeks, he'd gradually relaxed his guard slightly, becoming accustomed to Clara's presence and seemingly accepting her as a non-threat. He no longer kept his hand poised near his gun when Clara moved too quickly or unexpectedly. He'd even accepted the coffee she'd tentatively offered him last week, though he'd carefully inspected it thoroughly before taking a cautious sip, his eyes never leaving her. "Miss Martinez," Marco said one afternoon, breaking his usual silence, his voice low and respectful. "Mr. Ricci would like to know what materials you need." "Proper materials. He can have them delivered." Clara looked up from where she was meticulously crafting a new ankle support from an old motorcycle foot peg, her brow furrowed in thought. "I'm good with what I have," she said, her voice firm but polite. "Creativity works better than money sometimes." Marco looked skeptical, his expression conveying a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect, but he simply nodded slowly, accepting her answer without further argument. What Clara didn't explicitly say, couldn't quite bring herself to articulate, was that she actually enjoyed the challenge, the thrill of ingenuity, the satisfaction of making something from nothing. She liked taking broken things, discarded car parts, damaged bike frames, seemingly worthless scrap metal, and transforming them into something that could help this extraordinary kid walk, run, and maybe even dance again someday. There was a certain poetry in it, a sense of redemption for all the things she couldn't fix in her own life, all the dreams she'd let slip through her fingers. By week 5, Lucia was walking with only the slightest hint of a limp, her movements almost completely natural. Clara had meticulously built her 3 different support frames, each designed for a specific purpose. A lightweight frame for school, a reinforced frame for longer distances, and a heavy-duty frame for rough terrain and physical activities, outdoor activities, and a minimal brace for therapy exercises. Each one was custom-fitted, adjusted weekly as Lucia's muscles grew stronger. "You're a genius," Lucia declared one Tuesday, testing the new lightweight frame. "Like Tony Stark, but for legs instead of suits." "Tony Stark is fictional," Clara pointed out. "So you're doing impossible things too." Clara snorted, but she felt a glow of pride she hadn't experienced since dropping out of MIT 6 years ago. Back then, she'd been developing prosthetic limb technology, dreaming of patents and changing lives. Then, her mom got sick, the money ran out, and dreams became luxuries she couldn't afford. But here in this garage, maybe she was changing a life after all. Just one, but one that mattered. "How's your hip feeling when you walk now?" Clara asked, making notes in the journal she'd started keeping about Lucia's progress. "Better," the physical therapist asked what I'd been doing differently. I told her I had a secret weapon. "Lucia, don't worry. I didn't say your name. I just said I found someone who understood mechanics better than medicine." Marco's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. "Mr. Ricci is 5 minutes away. He said he'd like to see the workshop." Clara's stomach dropped. "He's coming here. He's been curious," Marco said simply, "about what his daughter does every Tuesday for 2 hours. Lucia grabbed Clara's hand. "It's okay. Papa just wants to see you're not a crazy person." "You're not a crazy person, right? Jury's still out," Clara muttered, quickly shoving tools back into organized chaos. 5 minutes later, a black Mercedes, newer than the one that had broken down, pulled up outside. Matteo Ricci stepped out wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Clara's monthly revenue. He filled the doorway of her garage, and Clara was struck again by the barely contained power in him, like a weapon in a display case. Beautiful, dangerous, and just waiting for an excuse. "Mr. Ricci," Clara said, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "Welcome to the kingdom of Greece and broken dreams." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "My daughter speaks highly of her kingdom." Lucia shot her papa a look. Lucia walked toward him, her steps confident and smooth. Watch how stable I am now. Clara built a gyroscopic balance system into the ankle joint. It autocorrects if I start to tilt. Mateo watched his daughter walk, and Clara saw something shift in his face. The hard edges softened. The dangerous man became just a father, watching his child do something he'd been told might never happen. Remarkable, he said quietly. His eyes moved to Clara. You've been doing this every week. She's an excellent student, Clara said. Asks good questions. Understands mechanical principles faster than most adults. I meant the braces, the modifications. Clara shrugged. She needed help. I can help. It's not complicated. But Mateo's expression said it was complicated. Very complicated. We should discuss compensation, he said. Proper payment for your time and expertise. Lucia's homework company is payment enough. Kid knows more about Roman history than I ever did. Something flickered in Mateo's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. He wasn't used to people refusing his money, Clara realized. Wasn't used to people who wanted nothing from him. Nevertheless, Mateo said, what you're doing for my daughter. He paused, and Clara heard the weight of unspoken things. It matters more than you know. He turned to leave, then stopped. Marco will continue to bring Lucia on Tuesdays. If that's acceptable. It's acceptable, Clara said. After they left, Clara stood in her garage, feeling like she just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. This time, Clara didn't delete it. Mateo arrived on a Thursday, not a Tuesday. Clara was demonstrating leverage principles to Lucia using a car jack when she noticed him standing in the doorway, not announcing himself, just watching. She had learned not to startle easily around Mateo Ricci. Men like him moved like predators, silent until they wanted to be heard. You're early, Clara said, not looking up from the jack. Or late. Depends on perspective. Neither, Mateo replied. I had business nearby. Thought I'd see what happens during these lessons. Lucia beamed. Papa, Clara's teaching me about mechanical advantage. Did you know a small force can lift something super heavy if you use the right lever point? It's basically magic, but with physics. Fascinating, Mateo said. And he actually sounded like he meant it. Clara gestured to a folding chair, the only clean seat in the garage. Pull up a throne. We're about to do walking drills. She expected him to decline, to check his expensive watch and remember some urgent meeting. Instead, Mateo sat, crossing one ankle over his knee, looking perfectly at ease in a garage that probably violated every health code in the city. Okay, Lucia, Clara said, standing. Remember what we worked on last week? Walking backward puts different stress on the joints. Let's see if the new ankle rotators are doing their job. Lucia positioned herself at one end of the garage, concentration written across her face. She took a breath, then began walking backward, slow, careful, but steady. Clara walked beside her, not touching, but close enough to catch if needed. Good. Feel that resistance? That's the rotor engaging. It's supposed to feel like that. Keep your weight centered. Perfect. Now try turning while you back up. Lucia executed a clumsy but successful pivot. Yes. Clara high-fived her. That's what I'm talking about. 3 months ago you couldn't do that. 3 months ago I couldn't do anything, Lucia said softly. Clara caught the shadow that crossed the girl's face. The memory of pain, of limitation, of a smaller world. She squeezed Lucia's shoulder. Well, you can do it now. That's what matters. Again, 5 more reps. Then we adjust the tension cables. From his seat, Mateo watched the easy physical affection between them, the casual encouragement. In his world, touch was transactional. A handshake to seal a deal. A pat on the back that meant you'd pleased him. A hand on the shoulder that meant you were about to receive bad news. But Clara touched Lucia like it meant nothing and everything. A hand to steady her. A playful nudge when she made a joke. A high five for success. Natural. Unguarded. It was such a small thing. It shouldn't have mattered. But Mateo couldn't remember the last time someone had touched his daughter without a medical purpose or political calculation. After the drills, Clara had Lucia sit on the workbench while she examined the braces, making micro-adjustments with the precision of a jeweler. "You're favoring your right side when you turn," Clara observed. "Just slightly, probably not even conscious of it. But I can add a counterbalance here." She pointed to the left brace's hip attachment. "Redistribute the weight distribution by maybe 3 degrees. Will that fix it?" "Should help. We'll test it, and if it doesn't work, we try something else. That's engineering. Controlled failure until you find success." Lucia grinned. "That's what Papa says about business, too." Clara glanced at Mateo, one eyebrow raised. "Your dad's secretly an engineer." "Something like that," Mateo said dryly. Clara made the adjustment, then had Lucia walk figure eights around the garage bay. "Better, more balanced." She made a note in her journal. "Clara?" Lucia asked. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Why do you help me?" "Like, really? You don't charge Papa hardly anything. You spend hours every week on my braces. You could be making money on actual customers." Clara set down a wrench. It was a fair question. One she'd asked herself late at night when sleep wouldn't come. "Honestly," Clara said, "because I can. Because you walked into my garage with a problem I knew how to solve, and turning away from that felt wrong. And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe because fixing things that everyone else says are broken is kind of my specialty." She meant it as a joke. But Mateo heard the truth underneath. This woman with her failing business and overdue bills saw herself in his daughter. Saw someone told they couldn't do something, told to accept limitation, and decided to fight back the only way she knew how, with grease-stained hands and stubborn determination. "Plus," Clara added, lightening the mood, "you're significantly better company than Mrs. Chen's minivan. That thing judges me. I can feel it." Lucia laughed, and the sound filled the garage like music. Mateo's phone buzzed. Vincent, no doubt, with something requiring immediate attention. The underworld didn't pause for father-daughter moments. But for once, Mateo silenced it. He stayed for another hour watching Clara guide Lucia through strength exercises, teach her about torque and tension, make her laugh while discussing compression ratios. Clara never performed for him, never changed her manner because he was there. She was exactly who she was, direct, warm, completely present. In Mateo's life, everyone performed. Everyone had an angle. His advisors told him what he wanted to hear. His enemies told him lies. His associates told him carefully calculated truths designed to benefit themselves. But Clara Martinez just told it straight. "Your left cable is wearing faster than the right," she said, showing Lucia the frayed metal. "Means you're putting more weight on that side. We need to work on balance exercises. Boring but necessary." "Okay." Lucia agreed without complaint. "And you need to stop doing whatever you're doing at school that's creating this wear pattern. What are you doing playing soccer in these things?" Lucia looked guilty. "Just kickball at recess. I wanted to play with the other kids." Clara's face softened. "Okay, but we need to build you a sports brace. Something reinforced. Give me a week." She was going to build a custom sports brace for kickball for a kid who just wanted to be normal. Mateo felt something shift in his chest. A crack in the armor he'd worn for so long he'd forgotten it was there. When he finally stood to leave, Clara walked him to the door. "She's doing really well," Clara said quietly so Lucia wouldn't hear. "Better than well. She's thriving. Whatever else is happening in her life, make sure she knows she's not defined by those braces." Mateo looked at this mechanic who barely reached his shoulder, who had no idea who he really was, who was giving him parenting advice with absolute confidence. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in ways he couldn't explain. As he drove away, Mateo realized something unsettling. For the first time in 15 years, he'd met someone who didn't want anything from him. And somehow, that made her more dangerous than anyone he'd ever faced. Vincent Calibris had been Mateo's second in command for 12 years. In that time, he'd learned to read his boss better than anyone, knew when silence meant approval, when it meant someone was about to die, and when it meant Mateo was working through a problem. Right now, Sitting in Mateo's study at the Long Island estate, Vincent recognized a fourth type of silence, one he'd never encountered before: uncertainty. "Boss," Vincent said carefully, "we need to talk about the mechanic." Mateo looked up from the papers on his desk. Legitimate business, shipping manifests from his actual import company, the legal side of his empire that paid taxes and employed accountants. "What about her?" Vincent exchanged glances with Tony Marcetti, Mateo's head of security, who stood by the window. They'd agreed Vincent would take point on this conversation. Mateo respected Vincent's judgment. "Usually it's been 8 weeks, Vincent said. "Lucia has been going to that garage every Tuesday like clockwork. Marco reports the mechanic's background checks clean." But what? Too clean?" Tony interjected. "Clara Martinez, 28, dropped out of MIT in her junior year when her mother got cancer. Mother died 2 years ago. No siblings. No romantic relationships we can find. No political affiliations, no debt besides the garage lease and some medical bills. She's a ghost, boss." "She's not a ghost," Mateo said flatly. "She's a woman who minds her business. Or a woman who's been waiting for an opportunity exactly like this." Vincent pressed. "Think about it. Beautiful daughter of a connected family, disabled, vulnerable. A struggling mechanic suddenly has access, builds trust, becomes indispensable. It's a perfect plant." Mateo's expression didn't change, but his fingers stopped moving across the papers. "You think someone hired Clara Martinez to get close to Lucia?" "I think it's suspicious timing," Vincent said. "The Costos have been pushing into Brooklyn. That garage is in their territory. She could be theirs." "She fixed our car because it broke down," Mateo said, his voice dangerously quiet in the rain, "without knowing who we were." "Or she recognized the car," Tony suggested. "Recognized you. Saw an opportunity." Vincent leaned forward. "Boss, I'm not saying she's definitely a plant. I'm saying we can't ignore the possibility. You've taught us to question everything. Trust no one outside the family. But with this woman, you're breaking your own rules." It was true, and Mateo knew it. He built his empire on paranoia and careful calculation. He vetted everyone, trusted few, and always assumed the worst of people's intentions because assuming the best got you killed. But he'd watched Clara with Lucia for 8 weeks. Watched her patience, her creativity, her genuine joy. When Lucia succeeded, he'd seen no calculation in her eyes, no hidden agenda in her actions. He'd seen a woman who fixed broken things because she couldn't help herself. "Run her finances again," Mateo said finally. "Check for any deposits that don't match her income, any new accounts, any unexplained purchases. If she's being paid by someone, find the money trail." "Already did," Vincent said, sliding a folder across the desk. 3 times. She's exactly what she appears to be. Broke. The money you've given her goes straight to rent and utilities. She bought better tools last week. That's it." Mateo opened the folder, scanning the financial records. Clara Martinez earned barely enough to survive. Her garage brought in maybe $3,000 a month on good months. She had $47 in her checking account right now. If she was a plant, whoever hired her was getting a hell of a discount. "What does Marco say?" Mateo asked. Vincent shifted uncomfortably. "Marco thinks she's legitimate. Says she treats Lucia like a kid sister. No phones during visits, no photographs, no questions about you or the family business. She talks about engines and physics and shows Lucia YouTube videos about mechanical engineering. So Marco, who's with them every week, sees no threat. Marco's protective of the kid," Tony said. "Might be clouding his judgment." Mateo closed the folder. "Or maybe his judgment is the clearest because he's actually there." "Boss, enough." Mateo's voice cut like a blade. "I understand your concerns. I share some of them, but Lucia has made more progress in 8 weeks with Clara than in 2 years with specialists. My daughter walks now. Really walks. She plays kickball with other kids. She smiles every Tuesday morning because she knows she's going to that garage." Vincent fell silent. They all knew what Lucia meant to Mateo. The girl was his world, his weakness, his only soft spot in an otherwise ruthless existence. I'm not blind to risk, Matteo continued. Marco stays with them. We monitor the garage. Any sign of surveillance, any contact with Castellano people, any indication she's not what she appears, we shut it down immediately. And if she is a plant? Tony asked. Matteo's eyes went cold. Then she picked the wrong family to infiltrate. The words hung in the air. Promise and a threat. Vincent nodded slowly. He pushed as far as he could. I'll keep eyes on her discreetly. You do that. After they left, Matteo sat alone in his study, staring at Clara's financial records. The numbers told a story of quiet desperation. Someone barely holding on, working 80-hour weeks just to stay afloat. His phone buzzed. A text from Lucia. Clara says I can try walking without braces for short distances next month. She's building transition supports. Isn't that amazing? Matteo typed back. Very amazing. Proud of you, baby. He set the phone down and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch. Vincent was right to be suspicious. In Matteo's world, trust got you killed. Everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted something. And altruism was just manipulation with better marketing. But he'd watched Clara work, seen the focus in her eyes when she modified Lucia's braces, the way she celebrated every small victory like it was her own. He'd seen her refuse his money repeatedly, seen her spend hours helping his daughter for nothing but the satisfaction of solving a problem. Either Clara Martinez was the most dedicated undercover operative in history, maintaining cover to a degree that bordered on method acting, or she was exactly what she appeared to be, a good person in a hard situation, doing her best with what she had. Matteo finished his scotch. He'd been in this business long enough to know that good people were often the most dangerous, not because they wanted to be, but because they made you want to believe in things you'd given up on. Things like trust, like kindness without strings attached, like maybe, just maybe, not everyone was trying to hurt you. That belief could get you killed faster than any bullet. But watching his daughter walk, seeing her smile, hearing her laugh, that was worth almost any risk. Almost. The Castellano family operated out of a restaurant in Benninghurst, a legitimate Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and the best osso buco in Brooklyn. In the back room, where tourists never went, Dominic Castellano held court. He was 53, silver-haired, and smiled like someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in his life because he hadn't. Tell me again, Dominic said, swirling wine in his glass about the garage. Polly Torino, one of Dominic's street captains, leaned forward. Every Tuesday for 30, like clockwork, the Raichi girl shows up with 1 bodyguard. Big guy named Marco. They stay 2 hours. Girl leaves walking better than she arrived. And the mechanic, Clara Martinez, nobody important, broke, no family, no connections, wrong place, wrong time. Got lucky fixing Richie's car a couple months back. Dominic smiled. Luck. Interesting word for it. Around the table, 5 of Dominic's most trusted men waited. They'd been at war with the Ritchie organization for 18 months. A slow, grinding conflict over territory, shipping routes, and old grudges that went back generations. Matteo Ricci was winning. He always won. The careful bastard. Never exposed himself. Never made mistakes. Kept his family locked away in that Long Island fortress like some medieval lord. But now, apparently, he'd made a mistake. The girl's the key, Dominic said thoughtfully. Matteo's only child. His wife died 8 years ago. The daughter's all he has. We've tried getting to her before. Another captain, Gino, pointed out. That private school is a fortress. The estate is impossible. The kid never goes anywhere without an army. Except Tuesday afternoons, Dominic said softly. To a garage in our territory with 1 guard. The implications settled over the room like smoke. You want to grab the girl, Polly said. It wasn't a question. I want leverage, Dominic corrected. Matteo's been pushing into our operations for a year. Cost us $3 million last quarter alone. He thinks he's untouchable. Time to remind him everyone has pressure points. Grabbing a kid. Gino looked uncomfortable. That's a line, boss. Brings heat we don't need. We're not going to hurt her, Dominic said. though his smile suggested otherwise. Just hold her for a few days. Make Mateo understand he needs to back off. Return her unharmed once he sees reason. The men around the table knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was. But you didn't argue with Dominic Castellano if you wanted to keep breathing. Polly, I want full surveillance on the garage, Dominic ordered. The mechanic's routine when she's alone. Security weak points. I want to know every detail. And the bodyguard, 1 guard against 4 of ours. Not a problem. We move fast. We move smart. And we have the girl in a car before Richie even knows what happened. When? Polly asked. Dominic sipped his wine. Soon. But not too soon. Let's watch a bit longer. Make sure there are no surprises. Clara noticed the car on Thursday. A dark blue Chevy Impala parked across the street. Same spot 3 days in a row. Different driver each time, but the same car in a neighborhood where most people drove decade-old Hondas and Toyotas. A well-maintained newer car stood out. She told herself she was being paranoid. Told herself it was probably nothing, but she'd grown up in Brooklyn. She knew the difference between nothing and something pretending to be nothing. On Friday, she mentioned it to Marco when he brought Lucia for an extra session. The sports brace was ready for testing. Blue Impala, she said quietly while Lucia was in the bathroom. Across the street. Been there all week. Different guys. Marco's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hand move toward his jacket. Which car? Gone now, but same spot every day. 2 to 6 p.m. You get a plate number? Wrote it down. Clara handed him a scrap of paper. Marco pocketed it without comment, but Clara noticed he positioned himself differently for the rest of the session. Angled toward the door, checking the street every few minutes through the window. When Lucia tested the sports brace, reinforced joints, extra ankle support, impact-resistant plating disguised as normal athletic wear, she didn't seem to notice the tension. This is incredible. Lucia jogged slowly across the garage, her movements controlled but confident. I can actually run, Clara. I can run. Easy, Clara warned. Build up slowly. Don't push it too hard, too fast. But Lucia was already planning. There's a 5K at school next month for charity. Do you think? Maybe, Clara said, not wanting to promise something that might not be safe. Let's see how the next few weeks go. After they left, Clara stood in her garage, tools in hand, and felt the weight of something shifting. The looks Marco had been giving straight-faced. The text messages he'd sent while Lucia wasn't watching. The way his hand never left his jacket. Something was wrong. That night, Clara stayed late working on an old Nissan's brake system. Around 9, she stepped outside to dump some used oil and saw it. The blue Impala parked 2 blocks away. Headlights off, her stomach dropped. She went back inside, locked the door, and called the only number she had. Mateo answered on the second ring. Clara, there's a car, she said without preamble. Been watching the garage all week. Marco knows, but I thought you should too. Silence on the other end. What kind of car? She described it. Gave him the plate number from memory. Are you there now? At the garage. Yes. Lock the doors. I'm sending people. 20 minutes. I don't need 20 minutes. Clara, stay inside. He hung up. Clara stood in her garage, surrounded by tools and car parts and the life she'd built with her own hands, and realized that life had just gotten very complicated. The blue Impala was still out there watching, waiting, and Clara, who'd never hurt anyone in her life, who actually fixed things instead of just breaking them, suddenly understood what Lucia had meant those weeks ago. Papa has to be protective because of his work. Whatever that work was, it had just followed them right to her front door. Through the window, she watched the Impala's silhouette against the glow of the streetlights. Somewhere in that car, someone was watching her back, keeping an eye on her. Clara picked up a tire iron, testing the weight of it in her hand, and waited to see what was coming next. 18 minutes and 53 seconds later, 3 black SUVs pulled up. The blue Impala just vanished into the night, but Clara knew in her gut it would be back. Predators always came back. It was in their nature. The surveillance got worse, more blatant. Over the next week, Clara spotted 4 different vehicles, each taking turns watching her garage, rotating the duty. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it anymore. It was like they were daring her. A white van, a gray sedan, a black pickup truck, all parking right in plain view, engines idling with men sitting inside, just staring at her front door. Mateo's response was immediate and overwhelming. A show of force. Marco no longer came alone. Now Lucia arrived with 3 heavily armed guards, 2 black SUVs, and enough firepower to start a small-scale war. They swept the garage meticulously before Lucia even entered, positioning themselves strategically at every single entrance, and watched the street outside with the unwavering intensity of soldiers on the front lines of a war zone. Because that's exactly what this was, Clara realized with a jolt, a war. And somehow, her humble garage had become the unlikely battlefield. On Tuesday morning, she discovered bullet holes in her dumpster. They weren't fresh, maybe a few days old, but they were unmistakably bullet holes. 7 of them, clustered together in a tight pattern that suggested someone had been practicing their aim, or possibly sending a very clear, and very unsettling, message. Clara just stared at those holes for a good 20 minutes, her hands visibly shaking. She'd grown up in Brooklyn. She wasn't naive. Sure, she'd seen her share of trouble, knew instinctively which streets to avoid, which corners belonged to which crews, but knowing about violence and having it literally show up at your doorstep were 2 completely different realities. Mrs. Chin stopped bringing her minivan in for service. Tony from the pizzeria called to cancel his delivery truck's oil change appointment. His voice apologetic, almost pleading, but firm in his decision. Even old Mr. Rodriguez, who had been a loyal customer of Clara's garage for 5 solid years, suddenly found a different mechanic closer to home. Word was spreading like wildfire through the neighborhood. Clara's garage wasn't a safe place to be anymore. By Wednesday, she'd come to a decision. When Lucia arrived on Thursday, for an extra session to tweak her brace adjustment, Clara had her speech all prepared, rehearsed and ready to go. She'd practiced it in the mirror that morning, making a conscious effort to keep her voice calm and steady, her reasoning perfectly sound and rational. "We need to talk," Clara said quietly after Marco had completed his usual thorough security sweep of the garage. Lucia, who had been chattering excitedly about her performance in gym class, suddenly went completely silent. "That sounds serious." "It is." Clara set down her wrench with a deliberate clank. "Lucia, I think maybe we should stop these sessions, just for a while until things calm down a bit." The light just died in Lucia's eyes, so suddenly it was like watching someone quickly snuff out a candle flame. "What things?" Lucia asked, although the tone of her voice indicated that she already knew the answer. "The cars, the men watching." Clara gestured helplessly, her hands fluttering in the air. "All of it. This isn't safe anymore, not for you and not for me." "But I'm always safe," Lucia protested, her voice laced with a hint of desperation. "Marco's here. Papa's guards are outside. Nothing's going to happen to me." "Something already happened, Lucia. There are bullet holes in my dumpster. My customers are leaving because they're scared to come here. This isn't. I can't." Clara stopped, swallowing hard to compose herself. She wasn't going to cry, she refused to. She was making a perfectly rational decision, based purely on self-preservation. This was the smart thing to do. This was about survival. "I'll find you another specialist," Clara continued, trying to keep her voice even. "Someone legitimate, with an actual medical practice and proper credentials." "I don't want another specialist." Lucia's voice cracked with emotion. "I want you, Clara. Do you even know what my life was like before I met you?" Tears were now streaming uncontrollably down Lucia's face, and Clara felt her carefully constructed resolve starting to crumble. "I couldn't even walk without being in constant pain. I couldn't keep up with the other kids. I sat in a wheelchair at school because it hurt too much to even try to keep up. The teachers all looked at me like I was broken, defective. The kids avoided me because I was the disabled girl who might slow them down. I know, but... And then you fixed me." Lucia was now sobbing openly in the middle of the garage, surrounded by greasy car parts and tools. Like it was nothing, like it was no big deal. Like I wasn't fundamentally broken, just simply incorrectly calibrated. Do you even know how that felt? Do you know what it's like to finally have someone see you as a problem they can actually solve, instead of just a tragedy they have to pity and feel sorry for? Clara's carefully prepared speech completely evaporated from her mind. All those rehearsed lines just vanished. She knelt down in front of Lucia, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. "You're not broken," Clara said fiercely, her voice trembling with emotion. "You were never broken. But I felt broken until you. You made me feel like I could actually do anything. Like maybe one day I wouldn't even need these stupid braces at all. Like maybe, just maybe, I could actually be normal. You are normal. Then don't leave me," Lucia pleaded, grabbing both of Clara's hands in a desperate grip. "Please. I know it's scary. I know Papa's world is dangerous. But you're the only person who's ever actually helped me without making it all about them. Every doctor wants to take the credit. Every therapist wants to write some groundbreaking paper about me. But you just help because you can. Because you actually care." Clara looked at this fiercely determined 10-year-old girl with tears streaming down her face and saw a reflection of herself. Saw the version of herself that had dropped out of MIT to care for her dying mother. That had given up on all of her own dreams just to survive. That had learned to fix broken things because she couldn't seem to fix her own broken life. Lucia wasn't broken, but maybe Clara was, and maybe helping this kid walk again was the first, shaky step toward finally fixing herself. "Your dad's going to kill me?" Clara said softly, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Lucia's face immediately transformed, hope blazing brightly through the tears. "He won't. He'll protect you. He protects everyone who's important to me." Yeah, that's kind of the problem, isn't it? But even as she said it, Clara knew she'd already made her decision. It wasn't the smart choice, and it certainly wasn't the safe choice, but it was absolutely the right one. "Okay," Clara said, taking a deep breath. "Okay, we keep going. But new rules. You only come when your dad says it's safe, no arguments, no negotiations. And if things get any worse." "They won't," Lucia promised emphatically, hugging Clara so tightly she could barely breathe. "Papa will fix it. He fixes everything." Over Lucia's shoulder, Clara caught Marco's eye. The big man's expression was completely unreadable, but he gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Respect, maybe, or just a silent acknowledgement that she had just signed up for something she didn't fully comprehend. That evening, after Lucia had left with her entourage, Clara sat alone in her garage and called Matteo. "I'm staying," she said simply when he answered the phone. "I'm going to keep helping Lucia, but I need you to be honest with me. How bad is this really?" Matteo was quiet for a long, tense moment. "Bad enough that I should tell you to run, that I should cut off all contact with you just to keep you safe. But you won't, will you?" "But I won't," he agreed, his voice heavy with resignation. "Because my daughter needs you, and what Lucia needs she gets even if it puts me or you in danger. I'll keep you safe, Clara. That's a promise." "How? With guards? With guns? That's not keeping me safe, Matteo. That's just making me an even bigger target." "You became a target the moment you started helping my daughter. That's not how I wanted things to go. But it's the reality now. And now I have to deal with that reality." Clara pressed her palm against her forehead, feeling a headache coming on. "This is insane." "Yes," Matteo agreed without hesitation. "Welcome to my world. I'm sorry you're in it." He hung up abruptly before she could even respond. Clara locked up her garage, walked back to her small apartment 3 blocks away, and lay awake all night, listening intently to every single car that passed by, every footstep on the street below her window. She'd made her choice. Now she just had to survive it. It happened on a Tuesday evening, just after 6 o'clock. Clara was making some final adjustments to Lucia's left brace, specifically a new ankle mechanism that would give her better lateral stability, when she heard the first engine cut out, then another and another. 3 vehicles, all stopping simultaneously within a block of her garage. Marco's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed. His hand instinctively went to the inside of his jacket. "Stay here," he ordered curtly, moving swiftly toward the main door of the garage. Clara's stomach twisted into a tight knot of dread. "Marco!" The garage's large bay window exploded inward with a deafening crash. Shards of glass rained down across the concrete floor. Clara instinctively grabbed Lucia and dove behind her heavy workbench as gunfire erupted outside. Marco returned fire, backing slowly toward them, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Back door!" he shouted over the noise. "Get her out of here!" But before Clara could even move, the rear entrance to the garage crashed open. 3 men in dark clothes stormed inside, guns raised and ready. They weren't there to kill, Clara realized immediately. They were there to grab the girl, to take her. One of them shouted, "Just grab the girl! Go, go, go!" Time seemed to split into slow, crystallized moments. Marco took down the first man through the rear door with 2 quick, precise shots. The front door of the garage exploded inward with another deafening crash. More men, too many men. Marco pivoted, firing his weapon rapidly, but there were just too many angles, too many targets to cover. He went down with a painful grunt, a dark stain of blood blooming on his shoulder. And then it was just Clara and Lucia, surrounded by 4 heavily armed men, trapped in a garage full of tools that suddenly looked like nothing more than useless toys. "Don't hurt her." The man who appeared to be in charge pointed his gun directly at Clara. "We just want the kid. You stay down and you stay alive." Lucia was shaking uncontrollably against Clara's side, whimpering softly. Clara's mind raced, calculating the odds, and they all came out to 0. For armed men, no weapons, no backup, no chance of escape. Except, Clara's hand closed tightly around the handle of the pneumatic impact wrench on the workbench behind her. She squeezed Lucia even tighter. "Run when I say so," she whispered urgently. "Clara, trust me." The lead man took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Lucia. "Kid, come here. Nobody gets hurt if you just cooperate." Clara swung the heavy impact wrench, still connected to the air compressor hose, and hit the trigger. The tool shrieked to life with a terrifying whine, its metal socket spinning at an incredible 8,000 revolutions per minute. She aimed it directly at the closest man's gun hand. The impact sent his weapon flying across the garage. He screamed in agony, clutching his shattered fingers. "Now!" Clara shoved Lucia toward the small storage closet in the corner of the garage, the only space with a lock on the inside. "Lock it! Don't come out no matter what." Lucia stumbled away as Clara grabbed a bottle of brake fluid from a nearby shelf and threw it at the second man. The bottle exploded against his chest, the corrosive liquid burning his eyes. He fired blindly, the bullets sparking harmlessly off the metal equipment around the garage. Clara dove behind the hydraulic car lift, her heart hammering in her chest. She hit the lift controls, and the platform rose slowly with a mechanical whine, creating a makeshift barrier. Not much, but it was something. The third man circled around the side. Clara grabbed a welding torch, sparked it to life with a hiss, and swung the hissing flame in a wide, menacing arc. He backed up instinctively, and that 1 second of hesitation was all she needed to kick his legs out from under him. The impact wrench came down hard on his wrist. Bone cracked with sickening crunch. But the leader was on her now, grabbing her from behind, his arm tightening around her throat in a chokehold. Clara couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in her vision. She stomped down hard on his instep, threw her head back sharply, and felt his nose crunch under the force of the blow. His grip loosened slightly. Clara spun around, grabbed a heavy transmission jack, and swung it with every ounce of desperate strength she had left. He went down hard, but there were more of them coming through the door. Clara heard their heavy footsteps, their shouted orders. She was out of tricks, out of weapons, and completely out of time. She backed slowly toward the storage closet, positioning herself between the door and the approaching men. If they wanted to get to Lucia, they were going to have to go through her first. "Last chance," one of the new arrivals said, raising his gun and aiming it directly at her. "Step aside." Clara spread her arms wider, making herself an even bigger, more obvious target. "No." He aimed the gun at her chest, his finger tightening on the trigger. The shot never came. The garage suddenly filled with a cacophony of new sounds, shouted commands, more gunfire, and the screech of tires. Men in dark suits poured through every entrance, moving with military precision. Mateo's men. They swept the attackers aside with brutal efficiency. No wasted movement, no hesitation, and absolutely no mercy. It was over in a matter of seconds. Then Mateo was there, bursting through the front door, his face twisted with a look of raw fear that Clara had never seen before. His eyes frantically scanned the garage, taking in the broken glass, the blood, the bodies scattered on the floor, until they finally found her. Lucia! His voice was hoarse with emotion. Safe! Clara managed to choke out, her legs suddenly shaking uncontrollably. In the closet. She's safe. Mateo started to move toward the storage room, but Clara got there first. She knocked gently on the door. Lucia, it's me. It's over. Open up. The lock clicked open. The door cracked open, and Lucia's tear-streaked face appeared. Then she was launching herself at Clara, sobbing uncontrollably into her shoulder. Mateo reached them, dropped to his knees, and pulled them both into his arms. His whole body was trembling. You're okay? He whispered, checking Lucia frantically for injuries, his hands shaking. You're okay. You're okay. Clara saved me, Lucia sobbed. They were going to take me, and Clara fought them with tools. She wouldn't let them pass. Mateo looked at Clara over his daughter's head. His eyes were dark and bottomless, filled with something that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. Not just gratitude, something bigger, something that felt like recognition, like he was finally seeing her. Really seeing her for the first time. You stood between them and her, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. You could have run. No, Clara said simply. I couldn't. Around them, Mateo's men were securing the scene, checking bodies and speaking in clipped, professional tones. Marco was being helped up, pressing a hand to his shoulder wound, but he was alive. The attackers were being zip-tied, dragged away, or loaded into body bags. But in the very center of the chaos, in the wreckage of Clara's garage, 3 people knelt on the floor. A father clutching his daughter, a mechanic who had become something much more, and the exact moment where everything irrevocably changed. I failed you, Mateo said, and Clara realized he was speaking directly to her. I promised to keep you safe and I failed. You got here in time. His jaw tightened with suppressed fury. This ends now. All of it. They touched my family. They threatened my daughter. He stood up, still holding Lucia tightly, his face hardening into something both terrible and beautiful. They're going to regret ever being born. Clara struggled to her feet, her muscles aching, her hands shaking with the adrenaline slowly wearing off. Mateo. He looked at her, and Clara saw the monster that everyone else feared. The Mafia boss, the ruthless killer, the man who solved problems with violence. But she also saw the father who gently smoothed his daughter's hair, heard the raw fear in his voice when he called out Lucia's name. Thank you, Mateo said, and the words carried the weight of a solemn blood oath. For protecting her, for staying, for being brave when you had every single reason to run. He turned to his men. Get them to the estate, both of them. Medical teams standing by. Both, Clara echoed, confused. You're coming with us? Mateo said, his tone leaving no room for argument or debate. You're not safe here, not anymore. Not until I've dealt with everyone who orchestrated this. Clara wanted to protest, wanted to argue, wanted desperately to stay in her garage with her simple life of broken cars and overdue bills. But that life was gone. Shattered like the bay window, destroyed like her sense of safety. She took Lucia's hand. Okay. They walked out of the garage together, leaving behind the blood and broken glass, and the very last remnants of the person Clara used to be. The Ritchie estate was exactly what Clara had imagined, and yet nothing like it at the same time. Yes, it was absolutely massive. 20 acres of perfectly manicured grounds located on the north shore of Long Island, with high walls topped with security cameras and guards posted at every gate. But inside the main house it somehow felt surprisingly lived in, almost normal. Lucia's crayon drawings were proudly displayed on the refrigerator. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay scattered on the dining room table, and well-loved books were piled haphazardly across the couch. Felt like a home, not a fortress, though right now it felt like both. Clara sat quietly in the medical room while a doctor, apparently Mateo's personal physician, cleaned the cuts on her hands and carefully checked her for any other injuries. Bruised ribs, a strained shoulder, nothing broken, nothing that wouldn't eventually heal. The doctor said she was incredibly lucky to be alive. Clara didn't feel lucky. She felt like she'd been hit by a Mack truck. Through the doorway, she could hear voices rising in the next room, Mateo's study. An emergency meeting was underway with his inner circle, and they were talking about her. Completely unacceptable. That was Vincent, Mateo's second-in-command. Clara had been briefly introduced to him when they first arrived. He had a face like it was carved from granite and a handshake that felt like a subtle warning. They knew exactly where to hit us and exactly when to hit us, because we've been following a predictable pattern for weeks now. The pattern was necessary. Mateo's voice was low, cold, and controlled. Lucia needed consistency. Lucia needed to feel safe, which we can't provide if she's gallivanting off to some garage in enemy territory every single week. That garage saved her life. Someone else interjected. It was Tony Marcetti, the head of security. That garage nearly got her killed. Vincent shot back, his voice laced with frustration. Boss, you need to see this clearly. The mechanic, she's a liability. As long as your daughter is attached to her, she's going to be a target. We need to cut ties, a clean break. Set the girl up somewhere else, somewhere secure with proper medical staff. Clara's stomach tightened into a painful knot. She knew this was coming. Had known it in the back of her mind since the very first bullet started flying. No! The new voice was small but absolutely resolute. It was Lucia. Clara stood up, ignoring the doctor's protests, and moved to the doorway. She could see them all now. Mateo behind his massive desk, Vincent and Tony standing on either side of him, and a few other men she didn't recognize positioned around the room. And Lucia, still wearing her torn clothes and with her face pale, but her chin raised defiantly. "Baby, the adults are talking," Vincent said, his tone not unkind. "Why don't you go?" "No," Lucia repeated, her voice louder this time. "You're talking about Clara. That makes it my business." Mateo's expression was completely unreadable. "Lucia, maybe you should go and get some rest." "I'm not leaving." Lucia's voice shook slightly, but she didn't back down. "You're going to decide things about Clara without her even being here? Without even asking me what I actually want?" "What you want isn't the issue here," Vincent said, his voice losing patience. "What's safe is the issue. Then make it safe." Lucia's eyes blazed with anger. "You're supposed to be this powerful family, right? You can make anything happen. So make it safe for Clara to help me." "It's not that simple, Lucia." "Yes, it is." Tears were streaming down Lucia's face now. "Clara stood between me and men with guns. She fought them with tools. She could have run. She could have hidden. But she stayed because she cares about me. And now you want to just throw her away like she's nothing?" "No one's throwing anyone away," Mateo said quietly, his voice regaining control. "We're trying to protect you, Lucia. Then protect her too." Lucia turned to her father, her voice breaking with emotion. "Please, Papa. I know it's complicated, I know it's dangerous, but Clara makes me feel like I can actually do anything, like my disability isn't the most important thing about me. Do you even know how rare that is?" The room fell silent. Clara watched Mateo's face, saw the internal war happening behind his eyes. The father who would give his daughter anything clashing with the ruthless boss who had built an empire on cold calculation. "If we continue this arrangement," Mateo said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "it will require significant changes. More security, different protocols, relocating Clara somewhere more defensible." "You can't relocate her," Lucia protested, her voice rising again. "Her garage is her life. Her garage is a crime scene," Vincent interjected, his tone sharp. "And a known target. She can't go back there." Clara stepped fully into the doorway, drawing everyone's attention. "I'm standing right here. Maybe you should include me in these decisions about my life?" Every head turned to look at her. Mateo's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even understanding. "You're right," Mateo said, nodding slightly. "Clara, please join us." She walked into the room, hyper-aware of the dangerous men watching her every move. She had fought off kidnappers just a few hours ago with an impact wrench. She could handle a business meeting. "Vincent thinks we should end your arrangement with Lucia," Mateo said bluntly, cutting straight to the chase. "For your safety, and for hers. What do you think?" Clara looked at Lucia, then back at Mateo. "I think your daughter has made more progress in 3 months with me than she did in 2 years with anyone else. I think she's this close to walking without braces. And I think ending it now would break her heart." "It might save her life," Vincent argued, unyielding. "She saved mine tonight," Clara countered, her voice firm. "If Lucia hadn't locked herself in that closet when I told her to, they would have grabbed her in all the chaos. She was brave and she was smart. You can't protect her from everything by keeping her in a bubble." "We're not talking about a bubble," Tony said, shaking his head slightly. "We're talking about basic security protocols." "Then upgrade your protocols," Clara said, shrugging. "Move the sessions here to the estate. I'll come here instead of Lucia coming to me. You'll have home field advantage, maximum security, a completely controlled environment." Mateo leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Continue. Set up a workshop here. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a space for me to work. Tools, equipment. I come twice a week with guarded transport both ways. I never leave the grounds. You get complete control over the entire situation." "And your garage?" Vincent asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Clara's chest tightened. Her garage. Her independence. Her whole identity wrapped up in that failing business with its broken lights and overdue bills. But then she looked at Lucia, and saw the hope dawning on her tear-stained face. And Clara knew there was only one possible answer. "The garage can wait," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Or close or whatever. This is more important." "No," Lucia whispered, shaking her head fiercely. "Not your garage." "Yes, my garage," Clara said firmly, meeting Lucia's gaze. "Because you're worth it. And because I'm not walking away from something I started. I don't quit on people." Mateo stood up, walked around his desk, and stopped directly in front of Clara. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched in his face, the weight of everything he carried. "You'd give up your business for this?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. "For her?" In a heartbeat, something shifted in his eyes, the last wall finally crumbling. "Then we do this properly. Vincent set up the workshop. The spare building near the garage will be converted. Whatever Clara needs, she gets it. Tony, security detail for Clara, rotating shifts, drivers, the full protection protocol." "Boss!" Vincent started to protest. "She bled for my daughter tonight," Mateo said, his voice cutting like steel. "She stood her ground when trained men with guns told her to move. She's earned our protection. She's earned everything we can give her." He turned back to Clara, his expression softening slightly. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll arrange transport to get your things. You'll have an apartment in the city, security included. The workshop will be ready by the end of the week." "I didn't agree to an apartment." "You're part of this family now, Clara," Mateo said simply, his tone brooking no argument. "That means we take care of you. It's non-negotiable." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw Lucia's face. The girl was beaming, actually beaming, despite everything that had just happened. "Okay," Clara said, giving in. "But I'm paying rent." Mateo's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "We'll discuss it." As the meeting broke up, the advisors filing out still grumbling, Clara found herself alone with Mateo for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere, "for choosing her." "I didn't really have a choice," Clara admitted, shrugging slightly. "Your daughter is impossible to say no to. She gets that from me." This time Clara did smile. "Somehow I believe that." Mateo's hand brushed her arm, just for a second. Warm, steady, real. "The people who did this," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "they won't get a second chance. I promise you that." Clara believed him, and that should have scared her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had since the bullets started flying. 6 weeks passed like a strange dream that Clara kept expecting to wake up from. The workshop Matteo built her was even better than she could have imagined. Anything she could have imagined. Climate-controlled, state-of-the-art tools, and a 3D printer for prototyping materials she'd only ever encountered in engineering journals. Carbon fiber, medical-grade titanium, aerospace aluminum. "This is insane," Clara had exclaimed the first day, running her hands over the equipment. "I could build Iron Man suits with this stuff." "Build my daughter new legs first," Matteo had replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Then we'll discuss the suit." Was that a joke? Clara still couldn't be sure, but she thought she detected the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. The routine fell into place quickly and naturally. Clara arrived on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, transported by a guarded vehicle from her new Manhattan apartment, an apartment Matteo had insisted on paying for despite her vehement protests. She'd dedicate 3 hours to working directly with Lucia. Then she'd retreat to the workshop until evening, meticulously refining her designs, rigorously testing materials, and fearlessly pushing the boundaries of what was deemed possible. Lucia's progress was nothing short of extraordinary. By the second week, she was walking without any assistance for stretches of 30 minutes. By week 4, she was confidently jogging a full lap around the expansive estate garden. And by week 6, Clara caught her attempting the stairs, taking them 2 at a time with the boundless energy of any other 10-year-old. "Slow down there," Clara called out, laughing in spite of herself. "You're going to break my masterpiece." "Your masterpiece can handle it," Lucia called back, her face splitting into a wide grin. It was true. The braces Clara had meticulously constructed, the final generation as she called them, were genuine works of art disguised as medical devices. Adaptive pressure systems that responded intelligently to gait changes, microhydraulics for seamless shock absorption, and weight-bearing joints that expertly redistributed stress based on the ever-changing terrain. They were everything Clara had only dared to dream of building back at MIT, now fully realized within the surprisingly well-equipped workshop on a Mafia boss's sprawling estate. Life had taken a decidedly bizarre turn. Matteo began appearing more and more frequently. Initially, Clara had assumed he was simply checking on security, diligently ensuring his substantial investment was being adequately protected. However, she soon noticed that his visits coincided with Lucia's therapy sessions. He watched intently from the doorway, peppering her with insightful questions about the mechanics, the progress, and the meticulously planned next steps. "You understand this stuff," Clara remarked one afternoon, catching him studying her detailed blueprint for a transitional ankle joint. "The engineering aspect of it, you're not just being polite." Matteo glanced up, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "I studied mechanical engineering myself. 2 years at Columbia before." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Life took a slightly different direction. You could have been designing bridges," Clara mused aloud. "Instead, I'm managing shipping routes." His mouth quirked in a wry smile. "It's a different kind of engineering, I suppose." They gradually fell into a comfortable, almost domestic pattern. Matteo would bring coffee, genuine Italian espresso, a far cry from the gas station sludge Clara was accustomed to consuming. They'd discuss Lucia's progress and subtle improvements while the girl diligently practiced her walking drills in the garden. Small moments, quiet conversations that seemed to carry a weight far beyond their simple words. One Thursday, Clara looked up from her workbench, lost in the intricate details of her craft, to find Matteo watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It was a look that lingered somewhere between admiration and curiosity. "What?" she asked, suddenly feeling self-conscious under his intense gaze. "You have grease on your face," he said, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle. "Same spot every time you're working. Right cheek." "It's my thinking grease," Clara replied, feigning seriousness. "It's very important for the creative process, you know." This time, he definitely smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. Then, without warning, he reached out, his thumb lightly brushing her cheek, gently wiping away the offending smudge of grease. The simple touch lasted only half a second, but it left her skin tingling, burning with an unexpected heat. "There," he said quietly, his gaze holding hers. "Now you look less like a mechanic and more like a miracle worker." Clara's breath caught in her throat. They were standing too close, she realized, acutely aware of the small space that separated them. Close enough to see the flecks of gold dancing within his dark eyes. Close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne. Something expensive, understated, and undeniably masculine. "Papa!" Lukia's voice shattered the spell, breaking the fragile moment. "Clara, come watch. I can do a pivot turn without compensating." They stepped apart quickly, the magic of the moment dissipating like smoke. But something had undeniably shifted between them. Clara could feel it humming in the air, a silent energy that crackled with unspoken possibilities. The work continued, of course. Clara meticulously built the final support frame, the one that would transition Lucia from a state of dependent mobility to genuine independence. It was, without a doubt, her masterpiece. Lightweight carbon fiber structure, intelligent response joints, and built-in sensors that meticulously tracked stress points, adjusting support in real time to optimize performance and minimize strain. "This is it," Clara told Lucia during the final fitting, her voice filled with pride. "This is the one that gets you to the finish line." "What finish line?" Lucia asked, her brow furrowed in innocent confusion. "Whatever finish line you want," Clara said, carefully adjusting the hip attachment. "Running, dancing, climbing trees, just being a normal kid who happens to have cool bionic legs." Lucia hugged her suddenly, fiercely, her small arms wrapping tightly around Clara's neck. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "For seeing me." Clara hugged her back, blinking hard to fight back the sudden rush of tears that threatened to spill over. "Always, kid. Always." Matteo had been watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable. When Lucia ran off to excitedly test the new frame, he approached Clara, his movements deliberate and purposeful. "She loves you," he said simply, stating a fact that was impossible to deny. "I love her, too," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't mean to, tried not to honestly, but that kid makes it impossible." "I know the feeling," Matteo replied, a hint of understanding in his voice. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Lucia through the expansive window as she walked, ran, and pivoted, moving with a newfound freedom she'd never experienced before. "My birthday is next week," Matteo said abruptly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Saturday, there's a celebration. Family, associates, the usual performance. I'd like you to come." Clara turned to him, genuinely surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because you're a part of this now," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Part of Lukia's life. Part of—" He hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "It would mean something to both of us if you were there." Clara knew she should politely decline, should maintain professional distance, should remember that this man inhabited a world of violence and danger that she wanted absolutely no part of. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the ruthless mafia boss that everyone feared. She saw the devoted father who would tear apart the entire world for his beloved daughter. The man who brought her coffee and asked about her designs with genuine interest, the person who had given her the resources to build something that truly mattered. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll come." Matteo's face softened, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "Good, that's good." He turned and left the workshop before she could say anything else, but Clara stood there for a long time after he was gone, her heart doing complicated things she didn't even want to begin to analyze. That evening, Lucia cornered her before she left for the day, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Papa likes you," Lucia announced with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Likes you. He's grateful you're helping me." "No, it's different," Clara protested weakly. "He smiles when you're around," Lucia insisted, shaking her head. "Real smiles, not the fake ones he uses for business people." And he watches you when you're not looking. And last week, he asked Rosa if his gray suit was too formal or not formal enough. Clara's cheeks flushed with heat. "You're imagining things," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm 10, not blind," Lucia said sagely, rolling her eyes. "And I think it's good. Papa's been alone since Mama died. He deserves someone who makes him happy." "Lucia," Clara said, her voice laced with warning. "I'm just saying," Lucia continued, undeterred. "If you decided you liked him back, I'd be okay with it. More than okay. I'd be thrilled." She skipped away before Clara could even formulate a coherent response, leaving Clara standing alone in the workshop, surrounded by her tools and machinery and the growing, undeniable realization that somewhere between the bullets and the braces, between the fear and the trust, she had developed feelings for Matteo Ricci. Feelings that terrified her more than any gun-wielding kidnapper ever could, because those men could only hurt her body. This could break her heart. The ballroom was magnificent. Chandeliers dripping with crystal, a live orchestra playing softly in the background, and over 200 guests adorned in designer clothes who probably spent more on their watches than Clara had made in her entire life. She felt wildly out of place in the elegant black dress that Lucia had insisted she buy. "You can't wear coveralls to Papa's birthday," Lucia had said, scandalized by the mere suggestion. So here Clara stood, perched precariously on heels that pinched her feet, and wearing a dress that cost more than her monthly rent used to. Watching New York's elite effortlessly mingle with people who were definitely not on any legitimate guest lists. "You look terrified," a voice said smoothly beside her. Clara turned to find Matteo standing there, utterly devastating in a perfectly tailored black suit. Her mouth went suddenly dry. "I'm fine," she lied, swallowing hard. "Just wondering how many people here could have me killed with a single phone call." "Only about half," Matteo said, his expression unreadable, and she couldn't tell if he was joking or not. "The other half would need 2 phone calls." "Very reassuring," Clara said drily, trying to regain her composure. His eyes traveled over her, slow and appreciative, lingering on the curve of her neck and the exposed skin of her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. Before Clara could formulate a response, Lucia appeared, practically vibrating with excitement. She wore a stunning red dress and, most importantly, her final generation braces, the ones Clara had spent 6 grueling weeks perfecting. "It's time," Lucia whispered conspiratorially, grabbing Clara's hand. "Are you ready?" "Ready for what?" Clara asked, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. Lucia just grinned mischievously and headed towards the orchestra, pulling Clara along in her wake. She whispered something to the conductor, who nodded and raised his baton. The music stopped abruptly. Conversations died down. All eyes turned to the small figure standing beside the orchestra. Matteo tensed beside Clara, his hand instinctively reaching for her arm. "What is she doing?" "I have no idea," Clara said, but her heart was already racing with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Lucia stood in the center of the ballroom, bathed in the soft glow of the chandeliers, every eye in the room fixed on her. Then, with deliberate care and unwavering determination, she reached down and unclipped her braces, both of them. Clara's breath caught in her throat. They'd practiced walking without support, yes, but only for short distances. Only in the privacy and controlled environment of the workshop. "Lucia," Matteo said urgently, starting forward, but Lucia was already moving. She took one step, then another, walking across the ballroom floor completely unaided, her head held high, her movements careful but confident. The braces dangled from her hand like discarded armor, a symbol of her newfound freedom. The room erupted in a collective gasp, followed by a stunned and absolute silence. Lucia walked the full length of the ballroom, maybe 40 feet in total, and stopped directly in front of her father. She was breathing hard, her legs shaking slightly from the unaccustomed strain, but she was standing on her own, unassisted. "Happy birthday, Papa," she said, her voice clear and strong in the echoing silence. "Look what I can do." Mateo made a sound that Clara had never heard from him before, a choked sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He dropped to his knees and pulled Lucia into his arms, his broad shoulders shaking with emotion. The room exploded in thunderous applause. Clara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she watched this hard, dangerous man hold his daughter close and cry openly in front of everyone. No mask, no control, just a father completely overwhelmed by a miracle. When Mateo finally stood, his eyes found Clara across the crowded room. The look he gave her was so raw, so full of gratitude and something deeper that she felt it in her bones, a connection that resonated within the very core of her being. He kept one arm protectively around Lucia and raised his other hand, signaling for silence. The room fell silent once again. Most of you know that my daughter has struggled with mobility since her accident, Mateo said, his voice thick with emotion and roughened by unshed tears. What you don't know is that 3 months ago, a mechanic from Brooklyn fixed her car and, in doing so, changed our lives forever. He gestured towards Clara, and every head in the room turned to follow his gaze. Clara Martinez, Mateo continued, his voice ringing with sincerity, is the reason my daughter can walk, the reason she can run, the reason she's standing here tonight without any assistance. She saw a problem that no specialist could solve and fixed it with ingenuity, sheer genius, and a collection of spare parts. Clara wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and escape the intense scrutiny of the crowd. As of tonight, Mateo said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone making an unassailable decree, Clara is officially Lucia's rehabilitation engineer and is under my family's protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me. The message was crystal clear. Clara wasn't just Lucia's helper anymore. She was now under the unwavering protection of one of New York's most powerful and dangerous families. Untouchable. The applause was deafening. A wave of sound that washed over her and left her feeling both exhilarated and terrified. Hours later, after dinner and cake and endless congratulations from people whose names Clara would never remember, she found herself seeking refuge on the estate's rooftop terrace. The city sprawled out below her, a breathtaking river of lights against the inky blackness of the night sky. Hiding? Mateo's voice came from behind her, a soft intrusion on her solitude. Recovering, Clara corrected him, turning to face him. That was intense. He joined her at the railing, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You gave my daughter her life back, he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. I wanted everyone to know. I just built some braces, Clara said, shrugging dismissively. You built hope, Mateo said softly. You built freedom. You built a future she thought she'd lost forever. They stood in silence, watching the city breathe, the distant hum of traffic a constant reminder of the world that lay beyond the walls of the estate. Thank you, Mateo said finally, his voice low and sincere, for staying, for fighting, for caring about her when you had every reason to walk away. I couldn't walk away, Clara admitted, her voice barely audible above the city sounds. From either of you. Mateo turned to face her, his expression serious. In the soft moonlight, he looked younger, less burdened by the weight of the world. Clara, don't, she said softly, holding up a hand to stop him. Don't say something we can't take back. Not yet. Let's just let this be what it is. And what is it? Mateo asked, his dark eyes searching hers. Clara smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners. Something real, something good, something worth protecting. Mateo's hand found hers on the railing. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. I can work with that, he said, his voice a low murmur that resonated deep within her. Below them, through the open terrace doors, they could see Lucia showing off her newfound walking abilities to anyone who would watch, her face radiant with joy and pride. Clara thought back to that rainy night 3 months ago when a car had broken down outside her struggling garage. How she'd almost ignored it, almost let them pass by. Instead, she'd fixed a car and, in doing so, changed 3 lives forever. Hers, Lucia's, and Mateo's. A mechanic with grease-stained hands had walked into a mafia boss's world and cracked it open, letting in a sliver of light he'd almost forgotten existed. And standing there watching the city lights twinkle, holding the hand of a man who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure, Clara realized something important. She'd spent years fixing broken things. Cars, engines, machines. But somewhere along the way she'd been broken, too. Broken by loss and failure and dreams deferred. And maybe, just maybe, in helping Lucia walk again, she'd learned to stand again herself. "What are you thinking?" Mateo asked, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. Clara squeezed his hand, a silent expression of gratitude and affection. "That I should send a thank you note to whoever made your car break down that night." Mateo's laugh was warm and genuine, filling the space between them. "I'll let them know." They stayed there until the stars began to fade. Two people who had found something unexpected in the midst of chaos. Something neither of them was quite ready to name, but something that felt an awful lot like the beginning of everything.